everyone. So for this day, we're going to be talking about the role of the campus press in times of the COVID-19 pandemic. So usually we often view the campus press, or essentially the high school or the college or even collegiate press, as simply a means of publicizing school matters, publicizing school announcements and others like that. But in this discussion, I'd like to go in full depth in terms of the very essence of campus journalism, as well as how it actually triggers the social consciousness that exists inside the parameter or within the proximity of the campus per se. So in this discussion, I'll be tackling it into 5 parts. We're gonna discuss matters on how we need to understand the political environment. So essentially, even students could actually do this. Student writers, essentially student journalists can, or rather they already have the capacity to think otherwise, in terms of how they balance, in terms of how they balance the essence of things, in terms of how they balance the political thoughts that exists even in the very sentiments of the students itself, because we often tend to neglect that we undermine one of the most common manifestations of expressions of freedom of thought, which comes from the students' rants itself. So as the campus press, how should we handle it? How should we somehow define this political climate that exists even in such a trivial environment like the school per se? Or should it even be considered as trivial? Secondly, of course, we're going to go to the matters on events-based journalism and, of course, issue-based journalism. How do we define events-based and how do we go beyond events-based? Essentially pursuing the idea of issue-based journalism, even for the campus press itself. Then third, of course, is the innovative means of journalistic delivery, since especially in this time wherein the quarantine is actually implemented, we as journalists need to define other ways of delivering our content, to deliver the journalistic formats for the perusal and for the benefit of all of our readers, which are essentially the students, the student body, the academic community, the teachers, etc., etc. How do we maximize already existent forms and even innovative forms, and also the underrated forms that are not really used as of this moment? Then the fourth one, we're going to tackle on the collective and individual publicity. How do we publish the content? How do we make sure that we're able to reach the concerns of our readers? How do we make sure that we reach the very awareness of most of the students who patronize our student paper, who patronize the student publication itself? And of course, the last item that I'd like to discuss, of course, is the campus press as the very representation of the relevant youth. How does the campus paper define itself as a representation of the opinions of the young community, the opinions of the Generation Z, the Zoomers, so to speak? And of course, how do we manage, or how do we actually maximize the capacity of the already existent expressions that are already manifested by the students? How do we stand as a representative to that public consciousness? So, first things first, I want to go to understanding the political climate. So we need to get a very general gist in terms of how the national issues are actually interconnected or somehow interdependent with that of the local issues. Let's say, for example, in events-based journalism, when it comes to publishing announcements of the school, when it comes to announcements of deadlines, announcement of activities, etc., it's only limited to that. But only in this pandemic, or rather in a lot of aspects that we often neglect and ignore, we have to realize that whatever happens in the national setting could could actually and indeed would affect the locality inside the campus. Let's say, for example, the COVID-19 issue or the novel coronavirus the novel coronavirus outbreak is actually a national issue. Not necessarily a national issue that's close to the Philippines, but rather it's a national issue that is discussed in global schemes, in global schema in the very general sense. So, what are the relations of the global scenario, the national scenario, to the local scenarios that are present inside the school? So we need to realize that the school or the proximity in which the student paper is actually responsible of publishing content can indeed be affected by large-scale political scenarios, by large-scale political climates. So we need to understand that in order for us to gain an awareness and of course an appreciation as to why we need to practice journalism. Not necessarily in the limits and the restraints of events-based journalism, but also 2 points wherein we are able to turn the national issue as actually relevant to the local issues that are indeed significant for the school environment. So, now, let's discuss the matters on events-based and issue-based journalism. What are the existing principles that is actually manifested by events-based journalism and of course issue-based journalism? So we delve on the contrast of presenting information that comes from events-based journalism, which also tackles matters on why we need to pursue issue-based journalism. Let's say, for example, in terms of the pandemic, there are already announcements wherein there are indeed initiatives for online classes. Now, online classes here in the Philippines, as identified as a third world country, is heavily ridiculed and in fact has received a lot of flack, received and has been drawn flack or received flack by most of the students, coming from the students primarily, and even some of the teachers. Why? Because as a third world country, they do not necessarily have the means to immediately patronize online classes. They don't really have the means to do that because online classes are matters on technology. And in terms of technology, not everyone really has access to that, especially those coming from the rural communities. So that itself is already an existent issue that is directly related to the school community. And it essentially roots down to the issue of the quarantine measures imposed because of the national issue concern on the novel coronavirus incident. So, with that being said, we actually learn from this as a matter of relating the national issue to the local scenario, to the local community present inside the school. There is always a major connection between national issues to school issues. Because one thing's for sure, all members or all stakeholders that are present inside the school are directly present or essentially are members of the society outside academia, which is society itself. The school is identified as a microstructure. It's just a microstructure that is the very orientation on how we need to act outside the school premises. How we are actually taught there how to act, how to orient ourselves in getting jobs, how to turn ourselves into competent individuals and others like that. That makes it as a micro form of environment. It's a micro scenario that represents society itself, or essentially prepares us for society or for dealing with society. So with that being said, we need to understand that before we even got inside that, before we even are members of academia, before we even became students, we first became citizens. We first became members of the most basic unit of society, the family. The family is already faced with an array of scenarios, like for example, unemployment, low pay rate schemes, in terms of privatization of education and others like that. So we need to understand that there are underlying relations in terms of how we look at the national issue and of course the campus issues. So there is always a connection between that, which is why even in competition scales, they don't really look at events-based journalism as a valid means of the very practice of it. Rather, they assess the ability of a student or the campus journalist in terms of how he analyzes political issues, and in terms of how he is able to ink down those issues to the letter and still retains and still practices the ethics of journalism. That's the very process of that. So of course, the events-based journalism already restrains students, or the events-based journalism restrains the student writer. It gives restraint to the student journalist in terms of how he or she should maximize the very limits of journalism as to how it should be practiced in reality. So of course we need to learn from the pandemic. The pandemic itself is already the symptoms of the pandemic, or essentially the outcomes of the pandemic, is already encompassing matters even to the school scenario. So why not turn the concerns of the school paper into such that relates the national issue to the local issues that are present inside campus. So, we go to the means of how to deliver journalism, how to make these journalistic formats accessible to the public. Since, for one thing, we need to actually realize that there are a lot of barriers, especially in times of the pandemic. There are a lot of barriers, undeniably, that prevents us from direct participation to most of our readers. We can't really provide them hand-to-hand information that comes from the printed word. But we have social media at the very least. Although it's not the primary means, still it is one of the most effective means in terms of connecting people with each other in spite of the distances that they have with each other. So, that being said, there are a lot of underrated forms in which we deliver journalistic formats that I think the campus press should actually consider patronizing. Of course, for one thing, we go to the blogs. Blogs are actually one thing that we use for written material and other matters like highlighting our artistic works, highlighting the photo, highlighting caption photography, highlighting poetry, and others like that. So I think that blogs are actually a very effective means in terms of spreading journalistic formats. Why? Because it gives more format and it gives more relevant write-ups that come from the writers of the educational institution itself. It gives us opportunity to publicize just how good the writers, the editors of the campus paper are really practicing. Because essentially, the quality of the write-up could somehow be used as a means for the publicity of the members itself, and essentially the very imagery of the school reputation in terms of literacy and others like that. We need to understand that writing, or essentially the practice of journalism itself, is actually a critical thinking skill that is most probably going to be needed in times of the 21st century. So what better way to do that than to give a lot of avenues to present our literacy, as well as how we present our ideas in such a disciplined manner like journalism. So by doing so, by being effective writers, or essentially developing skills in times wherein you're trying to publish your written materials through blogs, we actually develop a sense of integrity that we are able to publish in a certain period of time. We are consistent in the practice of publishing our articles, and of course, we provide ourselves with a lot of opportunities for writing, to continuously write, to discover new formats and others like that. Secondly, of course, is the vlog. The vlog could actually be repurposed in terms of turning it to journalistic formats. Like for example, If you're already aware of the GMA News Network, they are already making use of the work from home scheme. And how do they do that? This is by far a discipline on TV broadcasting, television broadcasting, telecasting at the very least. So, in their practice, they only need a camera device as well as a microphone device to somehow present the news reports that are given by the field reporters who are on field per se. So with that being said, journalism is still possible, or essentially journalistic formats such as broadcasting itself are indeed accessible and still doable even inside the home. So it depends, of course. Like for example, in this setup, I'm just using a computer monitor. I'm just using my old laptop. Rather, it's not really my laptop. This is just a laptop I borrowed from my father. But in terms of the video device, the camera device that I'm using right now is just coming from my cell phone. And the microphone that I'm using right now is just a mere Bluetooth microphone, which by far I just borrowed from my little brother. So, in spite of that, there are a lot of means that we could actually make do in terms of maximizing and transforming the very limits of the journalistic formats. This is actually a good time for us to test our flexibility. To test the flexibility given the very limited resources that we have. So, essentially connected to the vlogs are of course the podcasts. Podcasts are essentially one of the ever-growing industries, especially in the United States. Why? Because the podcasts are essentially those wherein speakers or the podcasters themselves only need to conduct independently produced broadcast scripts or broadcast pieces like others like that. So they only need one person, they only need the mic, and of course they need to develop certain context. So a podcast could actually be used as a means of expressing information and of course opinion. How to discuss the public opinion and others like that. Let's say for example, one of my examples, and of course by far not really one of the best examples, is the podcasts or essentially the vlogs coming from Banat Bay. Banat Bay is by far a blogger that supports the Duterte administration. Although content-wise it is in fact needed to be ridiculed, the format that he uses, or essentially the very practice that he uses, is of course being a podcaster, expressing your opinions over certain issues, expressing your opinions over certain matters, certain concerns, certain conspiracies, and others like that. Or rather, we could say that the podcasts are mediums of expressing your ideas, mediums of expressing your takes on certain disciplines. It can even go as far as food, the movie taste, book tastes, tips on academia and others like that. So of course we need to maximize podcasting because unconsciously we actually look at podcasting as an underrated form of broadcasting. By doing the podcast, we already conduct broadcasting at the very least. So I think the campus press or the members of the campus press should consider pursuing or developing their own group broadcast. It can even be done by a single student, by a single editor, or if they have a broadcasting chief, that's good. But essentially, they need to maximize the forms that the podcasts are actually enabling campus journalists to increase the number of journalistic formats that it's able to provide. And by far, it is essential in order for you to increase the marquee value of your campus paper. Not only are you limited to the written word, not only are you limited to publishing written works and art, and of course photography in the very general. You're also able to conduct broadcast practices. So that's one way that we could consider. So, of course, for the fourth one, this can be used by artists and photographers or photojournalists at the very least. The online exhibit. This can be a certain collection or a series of artworks or caption photos taken by the campus press's photojournalists. So, in the online exhibit, we only need to make a certain thread in terms of highlighting consistent content that our artists and our photographers can actually produce. In this way, we actually advertise the skills that are present in most of our artists, because by far, in terms of the publication, the artists need to be maximized. They need to be maximized in terms of how they present their ideas, because essentially this is the very misconception that my fellow school paper advisors often view artists. They often view artists as occasional contributors. They are only needed in certain periods of time, and the rest of the production they don't really consider including the cartoonists, they don't really consider including the photojournalists. But in reality, they need visual arts and they need art in times of the production of the newspaper. And what better way to do that than make a collection of online published content coming from the artists, coming from the photojournalists. And by doing so, when it comes to the time wherein you're going to develop your school paper, you already have a collection of artworks to choose from. See, that's one way of making do with what we have. The artists, or rather the artist, needs to develop this sense of flexibility in terms of how he is able to project himself as an artist and, of course, as a member of the campus press. Because as far as I'm concerned, visual arts, so long as it has relevant content, so long as it has relevant messages that are indeed significant for given political climates, then only then would it be considered as significant and of course applicable to the current situation. And of course, aside from the four formats, there are a lot of ways that we could do to publicize the content, to publicize and maximize the usage of the journalistic formats. Because especially in times like this, we need online content now more than ever. We need content coming from the campus press. Our students are in dire need of something to read, something to view, something to listen to, something to react. Because as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the use of social media, that's where the student expresses their opinion primarily. That's where the student views himself or herself as relevant to the political discourse that exists in certain periods, like of course the COVID-19 pandemic. So that being said, we go to the collective and individual publicity that comes with practicing these various journalistic formats. So by doing so, we have a lot of ways to do that, to publicize our content. We can use Facebook pages. A lot of campus papers, or rather school papers, already have their own Facebook pages, but they need to maximize these Facebook pages by actually putting content coming from the members of the press itself. So that's one way to utilize the Facebook page, because for one thing, it actually stands as a central point wherein the student is updated, continuously updated with the matters concerning the school, because the campus paper is not really just some organization. It's not just an organization. It needs to be considered as an institution that is primarily responsible to the publicity, not only of school announcements, but rather school matters that concern the school, the administrators, and most importantly, the students in general. So of course, other matters, like for example, aside from Facebook pages, you could also use Twitter, you could also use YouTube, you could also use Tumblr for those of the bloggers, and of course, WordPress. If you want to make a certain website wherein all of your content or all of the campus paper members are contributing, if you want to solidify and collect all of those, you can publish them via WordPress. You just need to make an independent free blog. You could already start doing that right now. And of course, once you already have content, you just have to publicize the WordPress. Just have to publicize the blog post, the website, the very website of the school paper itself. That's actually necessary because the school paper needs to be viewed as essentially one of the very concerns that needs to be maximized in terms of publicizing information and others like that. So now we ask the question: what do we need to publish in times like this? As June Cruz Reyes from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Manila, Santa Mesa says, there are maraming dapat isulat sa mga panahong ito. There are a lot of topics we need to write about. especially in times of this crisis, is not really taking advantage of the pandemic. It's not really taking advantage of the pandemic. Rather, the pandemic itself is already a compelling reason for us to make content. It's already a compelling reason for us to make content. Why? Because the campus press needs to continuously make its readers feel that even in times of the pandemic, even in times of a crisis, it's still there working for it. It's still there working for them, informing them, collectivizing their opinions and others like that. So with that being said, we actually look at published content as a means to give or continuously provide our students, our very vocal students, the most vocal students, information that directly comes from the school paper to stand as the exemplar of those who actually start to produce and of course express their opinions. And in the process of that, we are actually able to influence even those who are remaining apathetical to the issue, who do not even give a concern in terms of the issue itself and others like that. So we need to develop a certain awareness on what materials do we need to publish. So of course, it goes from an array of news articles, columns, opinion articles. So instead of writing that Facebook post, I suggest we turn our opinions into opinion articles in such a way that it could appear as a valid form of an opinion. Because as far as I'm concerned, opinions, if they are unguided and therefore unvalidated, would only remain one-sided. And that's one thing that the very practice of journalism needs to go beyond to. We need to actually go beyond the one-sided point of view in order to stand as the middleman to assess both the morality coming from a certain first party, a certain second party, or if there is a third party, then we should take that as well. But ultimately, in terms of making the analysis, the campus paper has the responsibility to solidify those statements and of course to present its analysis on certain matters, on certain social issues. So, aside from opinion articles, there are caption photography. We could actually take photos even from our phone and give it a relevant caption like that. Aside from caption photography, we can use political cartooning, visual art forms at the very least, investigative research. Like of course, in the matters, if you often watch documentary videos presented by GMA News, you could actually do that once you get to know the structure. So investigative researches can even be done by high school students. Although it's not necessarily a practice that is usually taken by most campus papers, or rather, do they even have the capacity to do so? Campus press members already have the capacity to conduct investigative researches, so long as they are provided with necessary training to do such. And of course, poetry. Poetry is by far one of the most important literature forms that we could give to our readers, that we could give to the very patrons, the very stakeholders of the campus paper, which is of course the readers. Poetry as why poetry? Why not the short story? Why not essays, etc., etc.? Poetry by far is one of the most convenient forms of expressing ideas, because for one thing, it takes advantage of the lesser wordplay, and of course the maximal content that comes with such few words. So at the very gist of things, it actually takes part in the idea that society is currently delving in such a fast-paced movement. Even in times of the quarantine measures, society will not stop delving in such fast-paced movements. Of course, it needs to patronize convenient material. So in terms of adapting to such, we use forms like poetry. Poetry is by far one of the most convenient forms and most convenient literary formats that we could actually do. We have the option to write poetry, and we also have the option to read our poetry. There are actually certain collective of teachers who are beginning to do that. They consistently read online poetry and post it online in a certain Facebook page. So I'm not really going to delve further into that, but essentially, in times of the pandemic, in times of a moral crisis, we need to remind society what the definitions of morality needs to remain in times wherein the wit of man and of course the will of man is tested. And what better way to do that than provide soul-cleansing poetry? So, with that, we look at the campus press as a representation of the relevant youth. So ultimately, the campus press needs to realize that through its what do you call this words? What do you call this word? Through its practice of journalism itself, it is actually already it's actually an accepted means of justifying and of course including the members of the youth in the social discourse, because we need to break the stigma wherein the youth are treated as insignificant and therefore should not really take rather not really do not involve themselves in social discourse. Rather, we need to understand that as members of the press, that the campus press is ultimately a very effective means of representing why the youth needs to be involved in social discourse. Why? Because this validates and this provides a lot of basis for integrity in which the youth is able to express their opinions in such a mature and professional way. And what better way to do that than cohere to the very ethics of journalism? So ultimately, the campus press is a representation of the existing social consciousness that exists inside the campus, and therefore heightens the reputation of the school as that of critical thinkers. So the campus paper is a very representation of the critical thinking community that are inside the campus itself. So I'd like to end this lecture with the quotation of Margarita Duras by saying that journalism without a moral profession is by far impossible. So the journalist cannot do her work without judging what he or she sees. So of course, as campus journalists, we do not really have to remain, we need to break the notion that we need to remain neutral and therefore very much silent in times of crises that concerns even the school. In times like this, it is already proven as a necessity that we involve ourselves in the social discourse. We need to increase our visibility now more than ever. That's the very idea that campus journalists and of course my fellow school paper advisors need to take into consideration of, because we need to challenge the stigma. We need to challenge the stigma that the campus paper is only existent in times of competition. No, the campus paper is beyond the standard of competition. The campus paper is a service. The campus paper is a representation of critical thinking inside the campus. So we need to break the stigma that the campus paper is only limited to the competition and contest. Rather, we need to prove that the campus paper is socially relevant and it's able to challenge political thoughts even in the national scale. So only then will we be able to up the ante in terms of our journalistic skills. And in the future, we might be able to be discovered. We might be able to have ourselves discovered by a lot of institutions. So that ends my discussion for this day. If you found this video very helpful for you, I'd suggest you leave a like on this video, and of course share this video to those who think that might need it. So ultimately, thank you very much for my fellow school paper advisors, and of course for my campus press members. Let's keep ourselves vigilant in times of the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course keep ourselves updated in terms of the hottest news, the latest updates that the current media, the current journalists, the current practice of journalism actually presents everyone. So, with that being said, thank you very much. Stay safe.